Hi, my name is Steve Sass, and I am the 2021 chair of South Bend Venues, Parks, and Arts Ecological Advocacy Committee. I'm here today to talk to you about Bill 87-21, which amends two sections of City Code, Chapter 19, Sections 13 and 14. Before we dig into the bill's specifics, I would like to do a short recap of how we got here and how we serve the city. In 2016, during a period of public opposition and ecological concerns over the proposed sale of Elbel Park, the South Bend Common Council passed Resolution 16-08, which formed a 5-member special advisory committee to study and recommend all reasonable options for Elbel Golf Course. The committee concluded their work in April of 2016 with 6 recommendations to the council. One of those recommendations was, quote, to engage with ecological assessment consultants, not just with Elbel, but with all the major parks in the city. Out of this recommendation came a proposed park board resolution to establish the Ecological Advocacy Committee, or EAC for short, as a volunteer advisory committee to the Board of Park Commissioners. Upon review, the PARC committee requested amending the proposed resolution's text to include periodic reports from the EAC to the Common Council. On August 15, 2016, the Park Board voted unanimously in favor of Resolution 4-2016, which created the Ecological Advocacy Committee. The resolution defines the EAC as a non-binding advisory committee to the Board of Park Commissioners consisting of 5 to 10 members who serve an unlimited number of one-year terms. Another function of the EAC is that of a Citizens Tree Board, which is one of the obligations required for South Bend to maintain its Tree City USA designation with the National Arbor Day Foundation. Although forestry is under the umbrella of Venues, Parks, and Arts, their reach is citywide, and we frequently work with City Forester Brent Thompson on matters outside of our park properties. Over the past 5 years, EAC has worked with Venues, Parks, and Arts and the Park Commissioners on numerous ecological matters, such as the removal of Leaper Park Duck Pond, construction impacts to Ponender Park due to the widening of Douglas Road, the Howard Park bioswales, including helping to create interpretive signage, riverbank erosion, and the possible development of a new park property on the city's far east side. In 2020, we completed a revised and expanded Natural Resources Management Plan, which the Board of Park Commissioners ratified in December of 2020. Included within the plan, Management Strategy C7 calls for Venues, Parks, and Arts and the Ecological Advocacy Committee to work with the PARC Committee to revise Chapter 19 of South Bend Codes of Ordinances. Focusing on Sections 13 and 14, I'll begin by saying that both of these codes are 59 years old and quite outdated. Section 13 pertains to prohibited species of trees in the tree and lawn area, which is the area between private property boundaries and city streets, typically referring to the strip of land between streets and sidewalks. Section 14 contains an antiquated ban on 2 species of shrubs in the genus Berberis, commonly known as barberry. I'll expand upon what I mean by outdated. For literally thousands of years, the fungi Puccinia graminis has been responsible for the agriculture disease known as wheat stem rust, which plagued both wheat and barley. By the mid-1800s, German scientist Heinrich Anton de Bary discovered that the fungi has a heteroecious life cycle. During one phase of its life, called the cereal phase, the fungi are parasitic on grains such as wheat or barley. During the other life phase, known as the alternate phase, the fungi require an alternate host to survive. De Bary determined that the alternate host plant was common barberry, Berberis vulgaris. European settlers introduced to Indiana both wheat as a food crop and common barberry as an ornamental plant. In the early to mid-20th century, several outbreaks of wheat stem rust caused widespread crop damage. As a result, efforts began to remove Berberis vulgaris from Indiana. These efforts were apparently successful, as the Biota of North America project now considers Berberis vulgaris eradicated from Indiana. Curiously enough, Section 14 also prohibits another species of berberis called purpurea, or, quote, the purple barberry. I've found no reference to a plant named Berberis purpurea, but there is a form of Japanese barberry called Berberis thunbergii, form Atropurpurea. Berberis thunbergii is another exotic barberry imported from Asia as an ornamental, but it is not an alternate host to the fungus. Lastly, Indiana does have a native barberry called Berberis canadensis, or commonly American or Allegheny barberry. Berberis canadensis is an alternate host to Puccinia graminis, but it was never common in Indiana, and the Indiana DNR currently classifies it as state endangered. The last major outbreak of wheat stem rust occurred in Indiana in 1962, the same year as this ordinance. Fortunately, the disease is no longer considered a threat to agriculture, as rust-resistant forms of wheat and effective fungicides have been available for several decades. What the proposed changes do are twofold. Section 13, which currently pertains to trees prohibited within the tree and lawn area, is changed to now define prohibited species of vegetation citywide, and I'll talk a lot more about this shortly. Section 14 removes the outdated ban on Berberis vulgaris and reassigns the section to update the tree and lawn area regulations. Working with the city forester, we updated this list to reflect current contemporary urban forestry conditions. We've also added taxonomic names to remove the confusion that often accompanies vernacular names. The primary driving factor behind amending these ordinances is to address the growing problems caused by invasive plant species. I thought it useful to start off by defining exactly what is an invasive species. The United States Department of Agriculture does have a specific definition for it, and that is, quote, non-native or alien to the ecosystem under consideration and whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. Traditionally, the best known invasive species have been animals, such as the ones you see here. Zebra mussels, believed to have arrived in North America in the 1980s in European ships' ballast water, are now throughout the Great Lakes region. According to the United States Geological Survey, quote, zebra mussels filter out algae that native species need for food, and they attach to and incapacitate native mussels. They go on to say that power plants must also spend millions of dollars removing zebra mussels from clogged water intakes. The emerald ash borer arrived in North America probably in shipping crates from Asia around 2002 and is now present throughout the eastern United States. In under 20 years, the insect has killed hundreds of millions of native ash trees, resulting in millions of dollars in damages to forest products, municipalities, and private landowners. Bighead and silver carp imported from China have escaped captivity and threaten the $7 billion Great Lakes fishing industry. Burmese pythons escaped from the pet trade and are decimating native bird and mammal populations in the Florida Everglades, and the list goes on. Although not as well known or charismatic, invasive plant species are equally destructive. Common reed, Phragmites australis, has invaded nearly every wetland in northern Indiana, forming dense monocultures, forcing out native vegetation. This image is of Strebel Pond in Michigan City, where the city recently paid a contractor $58,000 to attempt to control it. Like zebra mussels, purple loosestrife Lythrum salicaria arrived in North America in the ballast water of Eurasian ships. For decades, the horticulture trade sold it as an ornamental. Like common reed, it forms dense mats, choking out native vegetation, and it has already found its way into the new bioswales at Howard Park. Accidentally introduced to North America in agricultural containers, Canada thistle, Cirsium arvense, is a misnomer as the plant is of European and not Canadian origin. According to the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, quote, Canada thistle severely reduces pasture capacity and desirable forages, degrades wildlife habitat, and can hinder reforestation and landscape restoration efforts. Once a population gets established, it begins to quickly displace native vegetation, including desirable pollinator habitat, creating large stands with little biological diversity and low habitat value. I spoke earlier about Japanese barberry not being an alternate host to the wheat stem rust fungus, but I didn't mention that it is invasive. In this photo of the Bailey Homestead at the Indiana Dunes National Park, virtually all of the green seen in this photo is Japanese barberry that has escaped from ornamental plantings. Unfortunately, the financial burden of controlling this and other invasive ornamental plants on public lands defaults to the taxpayers. Japanese barberry is one of many ornamental plants that have escaped cultivation and become invasive. According to one study, up to 80% of our invasive plant species came from the horticulture trade, many from garden centers like this. But what is the cost of invasive species? According to the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, the most widely referenced study estimates that the damage caused by invasive species exceeds $120 billion annually. The service also states that over 400 species protected by the Endangered Species Act are at least partly at risk of extinction due to invasive species. To address this, in 2009, then-Governor Mitch Daniels signed legislation that created the Indiana Invasive Species Council, whose mission is, quote, to enhance the ability of the government agencies to detect, prevent, monitor, and manage new and long-established invasions, as well as increase public awareness about invasive species. The council is made up of 11 members, consisting of the Dean of Purdue University College of Agriculture, or designee, the Director of the Indiana State Department of Agriculture, or designee, the Director of the Indiana State Department of Transportation, or designee, the State Veterinarian, or designee, an employee of the Division of Fish and Wildlife designated by the Director, an employee of the Division of Entomology and Plant Pathology designated by the Director of that division, one representative of research on invasive species, 2 individuals representing the hardwood tree industry, the horticulture industry, the agriculture industry, and the aquaculture industry, and 2 individuals representing organizations or local government agencies concerned with land trusts, biodiversity conservation, aquatic conservation, and local parks and recreation. One of the provisions of this legislation was to allow the council to create an advisory committee, which they did. In 2012, the Indiana Invasive Plant Advisory Committee surveyed 116 Indiana agencies and landowners and found that their collective costs of managing invasive plants on 650,000 acres amounted to $5.85 million. That same year, the council and committee also compiled a list of 120 aquatic and terrestrial plants hereafter referred to as officially invasive in Indiana. In 2015, they revised the list, which now contains 126 species of plants. From this list came the Indiana Terrestrial Plant Rule, which Governor Holcomb signed into law in 2019 and took effect on April 18, 2020. The rule, enforced by DNR nursery inspectors, prohibits the sale, gifting, exchange, transportation, or introduction of 44 species of terrestrial plants from the official list. Unfortunately, bowing to pressure from the horticulture industry, the Indiana DNR removed 2 highly invasive trees from the rule. They also omitted several other popular invasive shrubs and vines, which had or have the designation of medium invasive or lower. This rule is a significant first step towards controlling the distribution of invasive plants. However, due to the omission of some of the most popular and most egregious invasive species, it falls short. The current number of species on the official list stands at 126. Of the 126, 13 of them, which are mainly aquatic, are federally regulated. The state of Indiana currently regulates 66 species, 3 as noxious weeds or pests, 19 as prohibited invasive aquatic plants, and 44 under the aforementioned terrestrial plant rule. The remaining 47 invasive plants are currently without any regulation, and of these 44 species, 33 have an invasive ranking of either medium or high. Here are a few familiar trees, shrubs, and vines on the Indiana Invasive Species Council's list currently without any form of regulation. Callery pear, Pyrus calleriana, native to China and Vietnam, which goes under several trade names, including Bradford pear and Cleveland Select, is currently flowering in northern Indiana. Widely planted as an ornamental street and landscape tree, it has escaped cultivation and is spreading rapidly in Indiana, invading grasslands, fields, early successional plant communities, and prairies. Although the Indiana DNR has asked homeowners and landscapers to stop planting calorie pear, many still do, and it remains a common nursery item. In the foreground of this photo of a commercial development along Nimp's Parkway, we can see calorie pear trees planted in the parking lot islands. In the background, we can also see dozens of escaped trees in the surrounding fields. On the north side of the parkway, there's now almost a monoculture of calorie pear trees. In the fall and winter, European starlings, another invasive species, congregate by the hundreds along these electrical wires. Calorie pear fruit is a favorite food of starlings who spread the seed far and wide. Another plant omitted from the terrestrial plant rule is the vine periwinkle, Vinca minor. Despite having an invasive rating of medium, periwinkle remains a common nursery item and residential ground cover. Periwinkle spreads vigorously and forms dense mats of vegetation that crowd out native woodland plants. Several South Bend parks, including Keller, O'Brien, Rum Village Annex, and Woodlawn parks have established populations of periwinkle, some of which will require years of work to eradicate. Burning bush, Euonymus elatus, is native to China and northeastern Asia. Known for its bright pink fall color, burning bush is a common and widespread landscape plant, particularly in group plantings on commercial properties like this one on Portage Road. Invasive but unregulated, its orange fruits are eaten and spread by birds. Burning bush can quickly invade native woodlands like this one at Portage Manor Woods. It's also present in the woods at Elbel, O'Brien, Rum Village, and Woodlawn parks. Along with calorie pear, Norway maple, Acer platanoides, is a tree with a high invasive ranking omitted from the terrestrial plant rule. For decades, municipal foresters favored and planted Norway maples for their ability to adapt to urban conditions. This slide from Elbel Park provides a clear juxtaposition of the invasive Norway maple's neon green flowers in the right foreground, with our native sugar maple's pale green flowers behind it to the left. This slide from Riverside Drive by Pinhook Park is a typical example of how invasive plants can spread. On the right side of the image at Pinhook Park are two purposefully planted Norway maple trees. On the opposite side of the road along the St. Joe River, you can easily see the neon green flowers of all of the volunteer Norway maple trees that have invaded the landscape. If we move to the right side of the image and face the river, we see this scene. To the layperson, it looks like a typical spring Indiana landscape. Unfortunately, virtually all of the green trees and shrubs in the background are invasive exotic Norway maple and Asian bush honeysuckle. Almost all of the real Indiana has vanished from this landscape. Contrast the previous image with this one. Here we have a balanced ecosystem containing a vernal pond, native spring wildflowers, and a haploa moth caterpillar at Rum Village Park. The Rum Village Woods is one of the last vestiges of pre-settlement Indiana left in South Bend. I recall an unattributed quote, "Ecological impoverishment is cultural impoverishment." This scene represents our natural heritage, and it ought to have the right to exist, just as the citizens of South Bend deserve to have it preserved for posterity. Healthy, balanced ecosystems like the Rum Village Woods and this wetland at Elbel Park are the results of thousands of years of evolution and cohabitation of native plant and animal species. For managers of protected natural areas like these and others, the preeminent threat comes not from the bulldozer, but instead from introduced exotic plants and animals, which quickly transform a healthy, balanced ecosystem into something like this, which will now require investing significant amounts of resources to restore. Compounding the problem, with every generation, our baseline perception shifts to where we don't realize how much our landscape has changed. In this December 2015 photo of Blackthorn Park, almost all the green foliage is invasive Asian bush honeysuckle. When Indiana State Forester Charles C. Deem authored the book Flora of Indiana in 1940, Asian bush honeysuckle was not present in Indiana. Within a few decades, it spread to all 92 counties and probably every township within them. These invasive shrubs, which outcompete native plants and overtake woodlands, are now so common that most people think that they've always been here. Fortunately, several species of Asian bush honeysuckle were included in the Indiana terrestrial plant rule, so they are no longer legal for trade. However, the damage has been done as they are now virtually everywhere. Unfortunately, our South Bend and Hoosier ancestors weren't proactive with combating the spread of invasive plants and animals, so this is now our burden to bear, and scientists speculate that climate change will exacerbate the threats from invasive species. However, this photo of Elbel Park is not of a setting sun, but rather a rising one. Where there is adversity, there is challenge, and where there is unawareness, there is the opportunity to educate. The City of South Bend Venues, Parks, and Arts is well positioned to support these ordinance changes with an educational campaign, which includes utilizing the expertise of the Ecological Advocacy Committee, implementing educational white papers and videos on the VPA website, programming opportunities for Earth Day, Arbor Day, and other events, implementing knowledge base articles for 311, producing flyers, trifolds, and other marketing materials on alternative plant species, utilizing the new native tree trail at Pinhook Park, as well as Spark Magazine and other forms of media. South Bend is also very well positioned to become a regional leader in environmental and ecological advocacy, and I believe that other communities will look to us for leadership and guidance. By passing Bill 8721, South Bend is investing in the future of our city, its residents, and its natural heritage for generations to come. Thank you for taking the time to watch today.